"Would you be mine, even if just tonight?" she asked. The black gardener said, "I'm not worthy of you." The night was still, the garden alive only with the soft rustle of leaves swaying under the silver glow of the moon. She stood, near the stone pathway, her heart pounding as she finally let the words escape that she had been holding back for far too long. Her voice trembled, yet carried a quiet strength as she asked, "Would you be mine, even if just tonight?" The black gardener, the man who had silently cared for every corner of her family's land, stopped in his tracks. His calloused hands, rough from years of labor, tightened around the tools he held as though they might anchor him against the storm brewing inside. He looked at her, disbelief painted on his face. She was a woman of grace and wealth, draped in elegance, while he was a man whose existence was confined to the background, seen but never truly acknowledged. The divide between them was clear, yet her words dared to bridge it. He wanted to say yes, to surrender to the longing that had silently grown in his chest with every glance, every fleeting moment they had shared. But his dignity, shaped by hardship, and humility, stood in the way. His voice came out low, carrying the weight of years of restraint. "I'm not worthy of you." The words cut through the night like a blade. She stepped closer, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears, and whispered that worth was not measured by wealth or status. She told him that she did not see a servant when she looked at him. She saw the man who noticed when her smile hid sorrow, the man who brought life to the garden when her own world felt cold and lifeless. Still, he turned slightly away, afraid of wanting something that tomorrow might rip away from him. His life had been built on silence and survival, not on daring. To believe in love that crossed boundaries. To him, she was a dream, and dreams were dangerous, but she was not ready to let go. With quiet desperation, she reminded him of the moments that spoke louder than words, the way their eyes lingered just a second too long, the way his presence brought her peace in a world filled with pretense. She told him she wasn't asking for forever, only for tonight, only for proof that the connection she felt was real. His chest tightened as her hand slowly reached for his. He could feel the walls he had built around himself trembling, threatening to collapse under the weight of her honesty. He feared what the morning might bring, feared her world would reject him, feared that saying yes would cost him everything. And yet, her eyes, brave and vulnerable, pulled him closer to the truth he had buried deep inside. Finally, the tools slipped from his grasp and fell to the ground, breaking the silence with a dull thud. He lifted his gaze, seeing her not as someone untouchable, but as a woman who had chosen him despite the world's judgment. His voice was softer now, a whisper that carried both surrender and strength. "If tonight is all we have, then let me honor it." She smiled through her tears, relief and joy washing over her as they closed the space between them. In that moment, they were no longer mistress and gardener, no longer divided by class or expectation. Beneath the moonlight, they stood as equals, bound not by duty, but by the courage to love. That night became more than a fleeting confession. It became a quiet rebellion against fear, a memory that neither of them would ever forget. He wanted nothing more than to take her hands into his and whisper the answer his heart was already screaming, but something inside him held him back like chains that refused to break. His soul longed to say yes, longed to surrender to the moment, but his pride and the dignity that had carried him through a lifetime of struggle weighed him down. He shook his head gently, his deep voice trembling as he whispered, "I'm not worthy of you." The words were not just a refusal. They were an admission of the barriers he believed stood between them. To him, her world was unreachable. A place of fine silks, polished floors, and grand names, while his world was dirt under fingernails, sweat on the brow, and days spent working unseen. Those words hung in the air heavier than silence, crushing the fragile hope that had flickered between them. She did not retreat. Instead, she stepped closer, her eyes glistening with tears that reflected the faint glow of the garden lanterns. Her voice was soft yet firm as she told him that love was not measured by wealth, titles, or the shape of one's hands. She said that when she looked at him, she did not see a man defined by the soil he worked in, but a man who noticed the sorrow behind her forced smiles, a man who cared enough to bring beauty to her world when her own heart felt barren. Her words carried a raw honesty that stripped away the distance between them, but still he pulled back, afraid of wanting what might never be his to keep. His entire life had been built on endurance, on survival, on never daring to dream of things beyond reach. Dreams, he knew, could be crueler than reality when they broke apart, and she was a dream so bright that touching her felt like tempting fate itself. Inside, a battle raged. His heart pleaded with him to cross the line, to believe her, to trust that for one night, maybe he could belong. Yet his mind whispered warnings of tomorrow, of judgmental stares, of the pain that would surely follow. To him, she was more than just a woman. She was everything he had been taught to stay away from, everything society told him was not for a man like him. And yet, as she reached out her trembling hand toward his, he felt the walls around him tremble. Her touch was not of pity, but of choice, a deliberate gesture that spoke louder than words. For the first time, he wondered if perhaps worthiness was not something decided by the world, but by the people who saw each other's souls, clearly. Still, fear gripped him. He hesitated, his breath shallow, his voice caught in his throat. She did not let go. Instead, she whispered again, gently reminding him that she was not asking for forever, not asking for promises he could not keep, but only for this moment, only for tonight. Her words pressed against his defenses like waves against stone, each one softer, yet stronger, until he felt himself slipping closer to her truth. And though the fear still lingered, it was no longer stronger than the pull of her heart calling out to his. The tension in the garden was thick, almost alive, as though the very night itself held its breath waiting for what might happen next. He stood frozen, his broad shoulders stiff, his hands hanging awkwardly at his sides, while she moved closer, unwilling to let silence close the distance between them. Her voice was gentle but steady, as she reminded him of the countless unspoken moments that had already tied them together, moments that might have seemed ordinary to the world but were extraordinary to her. She spoke of the way he noticed her sadness when no one else dared to look beyond her polished smile, of how his quiet presence often gave her more comfort than all the grand words from people who claimed to love her. She confessed that with him she felt seen, truly seen, as a woman and not as a symbol of wealth or expectation. Each word seemed to unravel the walls he had built around himself, though he fought desperately to keep them standing. Her plea was not for promises or forever, not for chains that bound one heart to another in the ways society demanded. She asked, only for tonight, only to know if the fragile thread of love she felt pulling between them was real. She told him that even a single night of truth was worth more to her than a lifetime of lies in the company of men who would never understand her. Her words were both tender and fierce, carrying the kind of vulnerability that stripped away the last shield of pride he had left. His heart began to pound as though it might burst from his chest, torn between the familiar chains of his past and the dangerous pull of her present. Inside, he wrestled with fear so deep it threatened to drown him. He feared her world, the glittering world of influence and scrutiny, would crush him the moment the sun rose again. He feared that surrendering to her tonight would leave him with nothing tomorrow but broken pieces of dignity. He feared the whispers, the stares, the cruel judgments of those who would call him a fool for daring to believe he could ever be enough. Yet none of those fears were as strong as the trembling hand she extended toward him, her fingers reaching out like a fragile bridge across the abyss that separated them. His resolve weakened the longer he looked at her. Her eyes, glistening under the soft glow of the lantern light, carried no pity, no charity, only longing and truth. For the first time, he realized she was not offering him a fantasy, nor demanding anything beyond what he could give. She was offering choice. She was offering him a chance to be more than the shadow he had become. The struggle raged inside him, every beat of his heart torn between stepping back into the safety of rejection or stepping forward into the unknown warmth of her arms. And though his fear screamed louder than anything he had ever known, the hope reflected in her eyes was louder still, drawing him closer to a decision that would change both of their lives forever. Finally, his strength gave way, and the tools slipped from his grasp, falling heavily onto the earth with a dull thud that seemed to echo louder than it should have. For the first time, he allowed himself to look at her without the veil of hesitation, without the fear of what society would say, and what he saw was not an untouchable woman from a world of wealth but a soul who had chosen him, fully and without shame. His chest tightened as he breathed in, and then, in a voice that was barely more than a whisper yet carried the weight of all his unspoken longing, he said, "If tonight is all we have, then let me honor it." The words unlocked something between them, something that had been waiting, hidden beneath silence and restraint. Her lips trembled into a smile, her eyes spilling over with tears that were no longer of sorrow, but of relief and joy. She stepped into him, and for the first time, the space between them dissolved. No longer mistress and gardener, no longer divided by class, status, or expectation. They stood beneath the silver wash of moonlight as equals, as two hearts brave enough to defy fear. His hands, roughened by years of toil, reached for hers, and she held them as though they were the finest treasures she had ever touched. In that moment, her world and his collided, and the walls built by society seemed to crumble silently around them. The night itself seemed to embrace their union, the stars above bearing witness to a love that dared to exist if only for a fleeting moment. Their words faded, replaced by the simple power of closeness. The air was thick with the scent of earth and roses, with the rhythm of two hearts that beat as if they had been waiting for this very night to align. They walked slowly through the garden paths, not needing direction, their steps guided by something greater than reason. Every glance they exchanged carried the weight of years of silence, of every time they had looked away when they wanted to linger. Every touch was careful at first, fragile as glass, until slowly it grew certain, warmed by the courage of finally choosing to feel. He had feared that stepping into her world would shatter him, but as he looked into her eyes, he realized that for the first time in his life, he felt whole. She, too, had lived under the weight of expectation, suffocated by the roles others had written for her. Tonight was not just a night of passion. It was liberation, an unspoken rebellion against everything that told them they could not be. And, as they stood beneath the quiet moon, they understood that even if tomorrow tore them apart, this night would live forever within them, untouchable and unbroken. In each other's arms, they found not just love, but freedom, and in that fleeting moment, both of them felt truly alive.